I didn't get to go trick-or-treating the last 2 falls because I was homesick with something caught at school. An old story for anyone who's ever changed schools. You're in a different group during cold season and you're tired from being socially awkward all the time, so you get sick. But that was especially annoying for me when I was the new kid and needed to make friends fast before becoming the school's outcast. Trick-or-treating on Halloween night would have been the perfect opportunity. But as I said, 2 years in a row, I missed it. So you can imagine my surprise when last October I was actually well, and someone invited me to go trick-or-treating with them. It was Bry, a pretty cool guy from the class across the hallway. We hadn't spoken much during my first 2 years at that school. After all, it was a huge school with 5 floors and 4 classes for each year. The campus is also big and has a beautiful forest behind the school, but I'll get into that later, cause it's about to get nasty. I can't say I've ever felt like I was truly a part of that school's popular groups. And not just because I was sick at the start of the school years, but also because I was always quite shy. I would sneak into the occasional chat about football, math class, or some girl I liked at the time, but none of the guys would really let me into their gang. Matt was the only person I considered to be my friend at the school, and that's probably because he was a new kid too. However, Matt was much more talkative than me, and he would always be going out with a couple of the guys after school. Now, I regret turning down all of those invitations. When cool guy Bry asked me if I wanted to join their trick-or-treating group the following weekend, I thought, wow, I'm finally an interesting person to these people. I must be a part of the school's community. Boy, was I wrong. I even got all excited and told my dad about it. Nice one. Impress them with a good costume, he advised me. And I took his word like an idiot. Around that time, lots of haunted house horrors were coming out, so I turned a bedsheet and some little bits around in the house into a ghost costume. I knew it was silly, but I thought since we were going trick-or-treating, we might as well have some fun, right? Wrong. Bry told me to meet them on campus behind the main building. I wondered why, since all the houses are pretty far away from school, but I thought it makes sense as we're all students there. So I arrived just as it was getting dark. I was expecting a group of people to already be there, but it was just Bry. He had a dark hood and a weird mask on his face. Sort of like the one Hannibal Lecter wore when they put him in the insane asylum. I recognized Bry from his weird posture, a tall, skinny guy with a hunched back whose hands were always in his pockets. Something was off, but it was too late to get out of it. Before I could ask Bry what exactly was going on, he started laughing at me for believing his invitation and for coming dressed in this quote-unquote pathetic costume. He hit me on the head so fast that I couldn't even tell what with. And before I could ask myself any more irrelevant questions, I was out. Remember that forest I was telling you about? I woke up in the middle of it. My ghost costume was on the ground, trampled and dirty. I lifted my head with sharp pain and a loud groan and saw Bry and a few girls all wearing those terrible masks and laughing at me. Everyone was so mean, and I had no idea what I had done to deserve this. Your friend Matt tells us you're a cool guy, Bry sneered at me. Matt is here? I looked behind me, even though my head hurt at every tiny movement after the blow earlier that night. Matt was there, tied to a tree, looking all regretful. We made eye contact and he mouthed a mute, "I'm sorry." "We just want to see if you really are cool," Bry continued. "But so far, you're not really hitting the spot." The girls just laughed, and one of them took her hood off. It was Laura. I actually liked that girl last year. I can't believe the type of girls that attract me. I started to feel uncool, and I began to feel like I deserved the treatment. Bry removed his mask so I could see his insane eyes. All the while looking at me, he picked the ghost costume off the ground and he put it over the fire, just enough to burn half of it. "Put it on," he said. "If you want to be in this gang, you better put it on." And burn myself? I thought. "By tomorrow, the whole school will know how dumb you are," Bry continued. "As if I'm not an outcast already," I replied. "What difference will that make? Why would I burn my face off for a bit of popularity?" "Exactly," Matt shouted from behind, and I remembered I had a friend in all of this. I got up slowly, acting as if I couldn't move any faster because of the pain in my head. I took a step towards Bry like I was about to pick up his burning costume. Then I ran as fast as I could to Matt and quickly untied him. We ran like crazy until we couldn't breathe anymore. We ran all the way to my house, which was a good 20-minute walk away from school, but we made it there in 5. I'm pretty impressed, to be honest. When my dad heard all the horrors, he started a whole show. He called the police and the school principal and made sure that Bry and his idiotic girlfriends wouldn't step inside the school anymore. In fact, Bry even spent some time in the local jail and ended up looking like the doofus he wanted me to be. The whole school now sees me as some kind of hero, and now I know that you'll never get popular just craving it. And hey, whether you're popular at school or not, remember to double check your trick-or-treat invitations. I was never a big fan of trick-or-treating as I'd always found it pretty silly. I'd always imagine little kids in orange costumes yelling trick-or-treat at old people's doors. I was about to find out it could be very, very different. I had just started college and I was eager to make some friends and get used to the busy schedule. During freshman's week, I met Amanda, a short girl with frizzy hair and enthusiasm for rock music and funny pranks. She had awesome energy, and I always felt good when I was around her. She would come up with these random ideas like, let's go to the dean's office and ask her if she intends to run for president, or let's call the fire department and tell them we're thirsty. I would usually go along with her funny plans simply because I would laugh and it would take my mind off of studying. But I did have to study. And by the end of October, I was already pretty tired. So I wasn't as enthusiastic about trick-or-treating with Amanda as she wanted me to be. But I knew it would be fun if I was with her, as she always has something up her sleeve. So when Friday night came, I went to Amanda's place and started a serious makeover for the night ahead. She had it all planned. We would dress up as sexy witches and go door to door telling jokes in exchange for whatever people would offer. Then we would use the sweets and gifts to play a prank on the dean. She was a stuck-up old lady, so I didn't really mind the idea. So we went out in shabby black clothes and daring skirts, which were even more daring considering the autumn wind. We were wearing black lipstick and heels, feeling like characters out of American Horror Story. We started with Amanda's Street, and some people were pleased to see us and even laughed out loud at our random jokes. I bet we put on a better show than all the 10-year-olds out that night. Some people gave us candy. A middle-aged guy even gave us some mini whiskey bottles. We probably looked over 21 with all that makeup on. Or we didn't, but that man wanted to respond to our joke with another joke. We walked towards a dead end, and it all got suddenly very quiet. There was no more wind, and there were no cars around, and no kids trick-or-treating. It was a bit strange, but we weren't gonna wuss out. I wish I'd asked Amanda's parents about the area before we ventured out like that. They would have told us about the creepy guy that lives at the end of the street that everyone avoids. He had a dog that never barked, and no one would really see his face. He never got any mail because the postman refused to visit his place after seeing something horrible in his basement. He never had any friends or a wife, and all the neighbors knew that sometimes he would tinker with things around his house. But Amanda and I didn't know any of this when we knocked on his door. We noticed that his front yard looked very Halloween-like, with just a dim, flickering light at his door and creepy ferns and ivy running up the wall. But that didn't concern us. We thought it was cool. It was about to get very uncool. We knocked twice. Then we heard some steps coming slowly towards us. The door opened, and that's when we realized this might have been a bad decision. He was at least 6'4", with an old, wrinkly face and a huge chin with a deep cleft in it. His eyes were small and sunken, and he stared at us with a crooked smile. He had all the characteristics of a creepy old dude you wouldn't want to visit late at night. I looked at Amanda, hoping for a joke to ease the tension, but she was lost for words as well. We looked at each other, wondering how to get out of the situation, but not saying a word. Well, come on in. It was the last thing we wanted to do, but somehow we went in, almost hypnotized. He led us to a cold kitchen in the back, which smelled of something damp and rotten. A few cockroaches were feasting on something that had fallen on the floor a long time ago, and we could hear the wind again, this time sounding like a ghost through the windows. Sit down, he said when he saw us confused and worried. I need to use the restroom if that's okay, I said quickly, thinking maybe we could go together and jump out the window. Of course, he nodded, smiling. Perhaps your friend wants to go as well? Now, I knew he knew what we were trying to do. We were not in control of the situation at all. He told us to follow him. He would take us to the restroom. He took us to the basement, and we were just looking at each other, terrified, expecting literally anything. The basement was dark, and he didn't turn on the light. That was extra scary. I quickly took out my phone from my purse and turned the flashlight on. I couldn't see much, just glimpses of jars with weird stuff in them. Amanda grabbed my shoulder and I gasped, thinking it was the guy grabbing me. Then the beam of light fell on a wall and I saw some stains. Rust? Blood? I didn't even want to know. And where was the man? I couldn't see him anywhere. I couldn't hear anything either except my own heart beating so loud that I could feel its pulse in my head. I stumbled over something and it made a horrible clink. Amanda shouted and we were both so scared we just started running up the stairs, hitting the man who was just coming downstairs with a tray of cups and some sort of beverage. The tray fell out of his hands and smashed on the floor with everything breaking into pieces. He screamed in anger and we ran even faster, slamming the door and almost stepping on a dog that was so old it didn't even bother to bark. We got to Amanda's place in what felt like 10 seconds. Then we exhaled for an hour, trying to recover from a genuine Halloween experience. When we finally got the courage to talk to Amanda's mom about what happened to us, she began to tell us all the creepy stories surrounding this guy. The police never caught him with anything, but everyone was sure as hell he was up to something. My advice to you? Do your research before you go trick-or-treating to random houses. It took me a while until I felt ready to tell this story. This is something that happened to me years and years ago when I was just 10, but it shook me deeply, and it completely changed my attitude to trick-or-treating and to Halloween in general. I just hope it doesn't ruin your enthusiasm for Halloween. I had always been a brave kid. My parents raised me to be curious and adventurous. They would take me on various wild trips around the country, us three and the family dog. When fall came, we would usually go hiking through forests, collecting chestnuts, and exploring caves. What could have been scary for another 7-year-old wasn't for me. I was always ready for an adventure. Well, at least till that particular Halloween night. It was cold and damp afternoon, and Dad declared that we would dress up for Halloween costumes and go trick-or-treating in a nearby village. We had done it in the city a few times before, but my folks wanted a brand new adventure. The village had a beautiful nature and definitely a creepier atmosphere. Cool, I said, as any excitable 10-year-old would, and put on a spooky scarecrow costume. My mom was a witch, my dad was a zombie, and even the dog Rusty got a little pirate scarf to fit the mood. We drove to the village listening to horror stories on the radio to get in the right state of mind, my dad said. I got in the right state of mind, all right. In fact, I was pretty agitated by the time we arrived at the destination. Stories of disappearing people and evil spirits had crept into my head, and I wondered if all of these were true. Remember, I was only 10. We must have trick-or-treated 2 or 3 houses with kind villagers offering us their healthy harvest when my parents had an idea. Hey, look at the cemetery. It looks so creepy. Let's go visit it. To be honest, now I look back at the time and I think they were pretty childish to drag their child and a dog to a decrepit cemetery in a tiny village on Halloween night. But you don't get to choose your parents, I guess. We climbed into the cemetery, which was perched on a hill, fallen with leaves and old spooky trees. It was perfectly quiet, not even a squirrel could be seen. And it was also getting dark, which I found pretty scary as well. I got fascinated by a couple of crumbling tombstones with weird engravings on them. I studied them for a few minutes, then when I looked up, all my family was gone. Where could they be? I started calling them, first quietly and then louder and louder, but no one would answer. Now I was really freaked out. I began running through the tombstones, shouting and almost crying. In all my despair, I stumbled on an overgrown tree root and fell on my belly on a pile of dead leaves. I looked up from the ground and saw a creature that I still don't fully believe was real. Its eyes were red, its fur was dark and shabby, and its growls sounded like two voices at the same time. It was horrible. I stood up as fast as I could and began running even faster, desperate to run into my parents. After a few very intense minutes, I ran into my mom. I began crying and asked her how they could leave me like that. "We're really sorry, honey. We were just looking for Rusty. We don't know where he went. He just disappeared." Now I began to understand. But could this be real? Rusty had dark fur, and he growls at times, but what sort of cemetery turns dogs into whatever Rusty had become? When Dad saw us, we all had a hug and decided with pain in our hearts that we should just get going, with or without Rusty. We notified Animal Rescue of a missing dog and gave them the location, but they never found a dog matching Rusty's description. I never really came to terms with what I saw that night, and I still don't let myself believe such a thing can happen to a beloved family dog. But the fact that it was an abandoned cemetery on that very night makes me think, maybe Halloween is not just a kid's story. In any case, I never went trick-or-treating again, and I don't think I will anytime soon. Sleep tight.